This is Chris Pugh. I'm Group Editor of Civitas Media. I'm here with Galion Inquirer reporter Kimberly Gasuras. Wanted to kind of follow up on an interesting story from this week. In Crestline, they had a council meeting, and if you've been following Crestline over the past little bit, obviously a lot of interesting things happening, from finances to some of the things going on. Kim, kind of tell me what you saw there, and we can kind of talk about what this means.
Well, a big issue seemed to be at their meeting Monday evening was an article that appeared in a different newspaper, and it was about the high turnover rate in the police department, especially since 2012, when Police Chief Joe Butler took over as chief. And it focused on that, and Joe Butler was quoted throughout the article, as you might expect. You know, if somebody, there were officers talking about him and, you know, him disciplining them unfairly and things like that. So, of course, he wanted to respond and did. And I thought quite well, you know, telling his side of the story. I've read the article. And Councilmember Jean Toy and the mayor, David Sherrick, seemed to be very fired up about the fact that the police chief talked to the media, and Jean Toy read the council's media policy for city employees, or in this case, Crestline's now village, so village employees, where they're not supposed to talk to the media, that all questions by the media are supposed to be referred to a council member or the mayor. And also, evidently, the village administrator, Mark Milliron, because after the meeting I talked to the mayor, and he did include Mark Milliron as somebody we could talk to, which is good, because that's who I usually talk to when I'm doing a story in Crestline. But as a reporter, I kind of have a problem with this, and was asking questions, as were other reporters that were at the meeting. You know, if there's a fire, are we not supposed to talk to the fire chief? We have to call the mayor, who doesn't know anything about the fire. And the same way with the police chief. If there's some kind of police incident, then we need to find out, you know, what's going on from the police chief. We can't find out from the mayor about a police issue. And they said in those cases we could talk to the police chief, but they would give us a minimal amount of detail, you know, just what they know basically at a scene. And anything else, it sounds like we would still, like the next day on our follow-up, would have to call the mayor, the village administrator, or a council member. And that's not how it's done anywhere else that I cover.
And it's interesting because it seems like everybody has a different media policy. I know I've covered Crestline Board of Education, and I walked over after the meeting to one of their Board of Education members, which obviously she's elected, and she definitely has, I'm sure, things to say, and she kind of smiled at me and said, hey, go over to the superintendent. So it's interesting, and you know, looking at even from a company side, a lot of companies have their own media policies in terms of who can or can't speak to the media. It's interesting how, looking at Joe Butler, I mean, as a police chief, is he just an employee, or is he really a department head? Because obviously Joe's responsible for how the police department works. So,
oh, I consider him part of administration.
Right.
You know, him and the police chief. So, but technically they are employed by the village. So, you know, it's a fine line. But I just, you know, when it comes to public entities such as a village or a city that you're talking about versus Walmart, where, you know, a manager, a local manager cannot talk to you. You have to call corporate office because that's their media policy. Right. Well, fine, they're a privately owned company. This is public officials. Right. So I don't know that I agree with their media policy, and I don't think the other reporters that were at the meeting agree with it either.
Well, taking a couple steps further, I mean, it's interesting, and this has been reported, you know, throughout local media. And Kim, throughout your career, you know, you've covered Crestline in the past. Obviously, Crestline's had some issues. I mean, the issue that's been clear is, you know, some of the fiscal issues that they're having. They're talking with the state. It may be like Galion, where they go into fiscal emergency. Kim, you've also reported on just some reported scandals that they're trying to investigate in the police department, if they're the case or not. And I know from talking to Gene, it seems interesting because it seems like Gene knows he's gotten in a tough position, and I think he was eager to take that challenge on. The interesting thing, and for our listeners out there, this issue is interesting because I've seen in the past us journalist types like me and Kim, we all get fired up and we can yell and scream at each other, we high five about how bad this is. But I think the one thing that concerns me is obviously how this affects you, the listener. But you might say, hey, you reporters are just mad because they don't want to talk to you. How does this just not affect you as you're writing your stories? How do you see it affecting the Crestline, residents?
Well, if they have questions they want answered, and those answers can only come from the police chief, but we, the media, can't quote him or talk to him, then that's a problem. And, if you're getting the information from the mayor or a city council member, that may not be the same as the information you would get from the police chief, who's right on the front lines, who knows what's going on in his department, that the public has a right to know about because the police department protects and serves the public.
And I think what people forget, too, is I think there's a lot of misconceptions on what is the newspaper for. I mean, our job isn't to bring city governments down. But then on the other hand, we don't represent the mayor, we don't represent council, we represent the reader. And, obviously our job isn't just to rip apart government for the fun of it. But then on the other hand, we represent the readers. And if there's something being said that we're not aware of, we're not understanding, those questions need to be answered. That article itself, even in the past couple months, we've seen that there's been some turnover on the council, there's been some turnover in the police department, and there are questions that need answers so people understand. Look, if tonight there's a police call in the Crestline, if you're a Crestline resident, you want to know what's going on. And although it's nice to see that they're replacing police members, it's better than them not hiring people at all. You might want to you scratch your head, like if at your job, if half the people are quit one day, you probably want to ask the question of, okay, why are they quitting? What's going on? What's happening here? And I think those are fair questions for even residents to ask, because, you look at the police department, these are the people who, defend you and everything, and, make sure everything is safe in the community. So.
Right, exactly.
So what do you see as the next step? I kind of look at this maybe as, with some of the issues there, sometimes if you're upset an employee, you may, cite a policy to say, hey, I'm disappointed in you, so I'm going to, get upset about you talking to the media. Maybe there's a deeper issue there. We don't know. What do you think the next step is in all of this?
I don't know what they'll do. I just don't see their media policy, which they say has been in place for several years. This is not a new policy, but evidently it's new in the fact that they want to enforce it now after the article that they didn't like. It just seems to me because the last few council articles I've done, and I know other media has written the same thing. I've talked to the police chief after the meeting, not during the public meeting, but after the meeting, and the police, police and fire chiefs, about their new, because they've both had new officers and firefighters coming in the past few months, and I talked to them about the numbers. How many do they have now? How many did they have years ago? How many auxiliary do they have? How many part-time, full-time? And they've willingly talked to me about that. Gene Toy said because this was about staffing, that Joe Butler should not have spoken to this reporter. Well, they've been speaking to me for months now about those were staffing questions, and nobody ever said a word about this media policy until this story came out that they were not happy about. As a matter of fact, during the public meeting, Gene Toy said it was embarrassing, the article for Crestline and the police department. So I think that they feel like it made them look bad, so now they're mad about it. But if you have media policy, for instance, back to the Walmart thing, it's always been their policy that you can only, reporters have to be referred to their PR person at the corporate level, and it's always been that way. Unless the local manager gets special permission. She's done some special events where I've been able to interview her, no problem. But if I want to go out there like on Black Friday and interview customers in her, I'm not allowed unless I have corporate approval. But that's how it's always been. And in this case, it hasn't always been enforced, the media policy. I didn't even know about this media policy, and I've covered Crestline for years. So I just find that interesting, that it's only being brought up when they're mad.
And as an editor of a group of newspapers, again, our goal here is to find the truth out.
Right.
And, you can't, when I'm pursuing a story, I'm looking at Google, and sometimes you ask a question and in thoughts of saying, well, the worst they can say is, hey, I can't talk about it. But as a reporter, sometimes you still have to ask that question. And it's interesting. And I know, and I'm not sure about Kim's background, but I know even in my background, sometimes there's questions you may not ask certain people because it's understood. Say the rookie police officer in Crestline, you may not go to him and ask him questions about how the department's run necessarily, but it seems to be that there shouldn't be a doubt that the police chief's a fair game, because obviously he runs that department, he's the contact, he's the go-to for how the department
exactly
runs, which is just wild. So understand, people, this affects you as well. This isn't just something that makes us want to tear our hair out, or we talk about freedom of speech or something. This is more of this is an issue that affects you, because I don't know what the policy is about talking to residents, but if they're nervous to talk to a local reporter, are they able to speak freely? If you, the resident, calls and says, hey, why has there been turnover in the Crestline department?
Yeah.
So in theory, I understand there's been a big, it seems like there's a lot of things that need cleaned up in Crestline, and although I respect and admire the fact that, Gene Toy's trying to be proactive to fix it, you still got to recognize you got to do it the appropriate way.
Right.
And although there's nothing necessarily legally wrong about saying, hey, certain people don't talk to the media, transparency is important. And
exactly.
Transparency just means, look, you've got to understand what's going on in your departments, and people have got to know. And I think the best, and I've had experience on the other side of the aisle too, understanding what to say when reporters come, and the more transparent you are, the better off it is. And read a story today in Wednesday's paper. Wednesday's paper, Crestline's still its police chief, and a lot of people are like, what the heck's going on there? So if you have any questions, email galnews@civitasmedia.com. So Kim, you're a Crestline. What's your strategy moving forward in this?
What's my what?
What's your strategy moving forward on this?
Well, I'm still going to ask questions and try to find out the information that the public wants to know. And I've seen the comments on the article that did run in the other paper about the high turnover, and people seem to be divided. Some of them blame the chief, some of them stood up for him. And I think people want to know more about what's going on in the police department and with the village in general, the village financial status, and what's going on in the police department as far as the allegations, and they were actually Facebook allegations, of an officer asking for sexual favors for somebody to get out of a ticket or something. And that's now being handled by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations, and those findings will be given to the prosecutor's office, the Crawford County Prosecutor's Office. So we're hopefully going to be hearing something about that soon, and either put that to rest, or maybe there will be something there. I'm not sure.
And I know here at the Inquirer, we've reported pretty much all we can report on there, because understand, like, when the allegation like that gets thrown around, hey, it's on Facebook, so that's kind of where we.
Well, the allegation was first made on Facebook, and the thing that they did point out the other night was that the actual person that it supposedly happened to has never filed a complaint.
Right.
That person, I think, was a woman, it was a man that posted about it on Facebook, and then it was talked about at council, and then people wanted to see it investigated, so they did an internal investigation at first, and then decided to hand it over to an external, which would be the BCI, and that's where it's at now. So,
for a lot of reasons, no matter if the investigation is valid or if the investigation comes back with nothing. A lot of times during the investigation, there's not a lot that can be said. And
right, nobody can talk right now.
Chief Butler's credit, he can't say
right, he
much.
can't.
But that said, there are a lot of questions that eventually need to be answered.
Yeah. Now, if there's nothing, if the finding is that BCI says nothing happened, then it's done. I'll write about that and move forward. But there are questions that will come up if there is something found out. The police chief will need to answer, but yet I'll have to call the mayor or one of the council members, I guess.
What do you think his status is on the council? I mean, sometimes in work, if somebody gets criticized for something that may not seem to be a big deal, sometimes you think there's a broader issue there. And obviously, the story wasn't complimentary to what's happening at Crestline.
Yeah.
But still, sometimes if somebody gets openly criticized like that, it's not always just about that problem. There's an issue behind.
Right.
You think all's right between council and the chief?
See, I always thought everything was okay before this. Like, I didn't see any issues there at all. So I don't know. I'm not there every day. I don't know how they all get along, but I did not see any animosity before this, and they just seem to be upset about the story and that he was quoted in the story. It seemed to be more isolated to that, I think.
Very good. Well, stay tuned and keep reading the Galion Inquirer.